Well, the last paper of this two-day conference, and it's unique in the sense that it doesn't talk about patents, and it's the second paper that is not doing any empirical estimation. Two reasons. One is, of course, there isn't enough data in this particular industry that I've chosen to look at, and in the IP that I'm trying to look at, and also because this particular act was implemented in 2003 and it is not as widespread to give enough data points to do anything empirical yet. Why I looked at the textile and apparel industry in India, it's because it's an important industry. It employs a lot of Indian workers. It is also important because textiles continue to be an important export item for India. But more importantly, I wanted to look at how low technology sector like textiles industry might or might not use intellectual property rights to boost its commercial valuation. One thing that has to be understood to sort of also explain why I chose the traditional textile part of the Indian TNA chain is because the innovative part of the textile industry is called the technical textiles, which is something that has only started to pick up in the new decade, and there's very few firms in India who are involved in technical textile research. But on the contrary, we have seen that in India, the current exports are based on the textiles and the fabrics that have been produced for centuries in the country, and these, because of the age-old way of production, they are at the moment certainly not patentable, or they don't really lend themselves to any stronger IPR, which is going to be the industrial designs, the other strong IP protection. So the first question to ask was, does the traditional part of the Indian textile and apparel industry use IPs? One thing that came out, what I did was, because there wasn't enough data available, this was based on surveys and interaction. It was done as a part of a project that was undertaken at the behest of WIPO. And what one did was to go and talk to the different stakeholders at different parts of the value chain, the weavers, the apparel makers, the fashion designers. And one does see that, yes, there is awareness, not only in GI, which is something that the government of India is sort of trying to promote very strongly for two reasons. One, there are these location-specific specificities in the textile production methods in the country, which can be or should be protected. So the government of India is very categoric about the fact that sectors or product lines other than wines and spirits also deserve the kind of stronger protection that GIs can offer to give. So in such a context, what I wanted to find out was what kind of benefits are geographical indication protection giving. Now, awareness, it is there not only because of the promotion, but also because of the successful commercialization of one of the 24 GIs that has been taken out in textiles in India. And what one does, however, find that in spite of all these awareness, there isn't too much of an excitement amongst the community to register for more laws. What is more registrations? What is basically happening is at the behest of the government. So therefore, then I wanted to find out what is therefore happening and how, why this is not really catching on to the imagination or exciting the stakeholders. Two things that I would like to highlight about geographical indications are that their collective marks, they are sort of a subset of the trademark group, but it is owned by a community of weavers, a cooperative, or the community in which that particular type of textile is being produced. The second thing about geographical indications in textiles in particular is they are largely national rights. Other than wines and spirits, it is not acknowledged as international right, and also there is nothing as a international registry or a repository of GIs yet. The WIPO and the WTO discussions are still on, and so far members have only started discussing the possibility of creating an international registry in wines and spirits. So therefore, because they are protected in accordance to the national laws, the problem that might arise is how to obtain relief in the other countries in case of an infringement. The use of GI in India, like I mentioned, has been sort of pushed by the government, but the relevance is that in the most dynamic segment of the Indian textile and apparel sector, which is the high-end fashion wear, the USP of Indian designs, Indian fashion, continues to base on either the traditional designs or traditional fabric. What has happened is Indian designs, some of them at least, have inspired international recognition. An important design, that is the Paisley design, is based on a Kashmiri way of interpreting the tree of life, and that particular motif has been widely used in India, and it was taken abroad during the British rule, and it is certainly one of the important contributions. But other than that, the local ways of life, so your holy, your religious festivals, plus the kind of weaves, they become the bedrock on which your modern and ready-to-wear fashion apparel is based. It's very dynamic, it's growing. Though it's a niche market, it has basically the clientele is the non-resident Indian or occasional wear by others, but it is a huge and growing market. The other importance of international protection is that, and this is something that I had seen in an international website, most probably in a Milan show. There was this dress, very western cut of the dress, but the material that was used was ikat. Now, cases like this prompts people to sort of ask this question: the value of that particular dress, priced at some $3,000 US, how will that get appropriated? If the material that is being used is ikat, and it is just replicated in the US or wherever. There are other instances of African textiles being produced in Europe and then used for European fashion. Does the community benefit, and how it benefits, if it is at all expected to benefit because of this kind of use of that traditional textile? What we have also found, and this is more important, that in spite of the kind of push that the government has been giving and the registrations that are being made, Indian textile and apparel firms are increasingly using only trademarks and copyrights. When we went and asked them that why this apparent neglect or disenchantment with GI, what they say is the geographical indication, what it does, it's a negative, right? It excludes others from using that particular way of doing things. But to benefit from it for commercial gains, these communities to whom this right has been accorded will need support to brand it, to market it, to popularize it. So branding becomes a much more relevant IP for them to use. So therefore what is happening in India at least, that most of these traditional weaving associations, they are financially weak. They get government patronage to register the GI, but after that the branding and marketing is something that they have to do for themselves. And what they say is, with or without the GI, if we are able to do the branding, most probably will benefit much more. Therefore, there is this perceived preference for registering a trademark rather than pushing for a GI. Also, we have seen that there has not been a lot of industrial design protection registered, though there are instances that the Tamil Nadu government has encouraged a particular association in a weavers association in India to not only get the geographical indication registration but also an industrial design registration which protected the way of weaving. There was a particular mill which would have been required to weave that particular textile, and that has been also registered as an industrial design. So it has, there are instances of this strong design registrations also being taken, but they are very rare and far between. Finally, what we have found that the companies are wary because the weavers or the associations who might benefit, they're also wary because they don't have the correct legal expertise. Unless and until that expertise is provided, the use of GI is unlikely to be very rampant in the country, in spite of the requests of all kinds of registrations coming in and registrations being done. Therefore, what we find from our interviews with the traditional textile industry in India is that since GI by itself is not an effective marketing tool, just having a GI registration doesn't do much. There is a need for either the government to support the subsequent branding and marketing exercise, or sort of try to provide some subsidized financial support, or either directly or indirectly, for these smaller associations to be able to benefit from it. Commercialization of rights are not, they haven't been begun for most of the GIs that has been registered, so maybe the government can push and help operationalization of these rights. There is also a need for policing and inspection. Given the weak financial might of these weavers associations, piracy is not something that they are able to prevent. Large firms are struggling with it. Microsoft is not able to manage to control all kinds of piracy. So there is a lot of support that the government needs to provide for policing and piracy prevention. Finally, and a particular sector that is benefiting from these traditional ethnic textiles is the Indian apparel industry. And this industry, the user industry, needs to support. At the moment, what we see is that this industry is a user, but they are not really keen to support the strong IP protection for the downstream industry. So this kind of integration is needed for either the survival of the industry themselves or as a part of the larger holistic development of the TNA industry to support. Therefore, what do we think that a government's pushing for a right like GI will do? The lesson that I take away from this particular survey exercise is that as also in patents, a thicket of IP rights needs to be created. Now, given that textiles is a low-tech industry, also textiles is a old industry where copying has been accepted as one of the usual things to do. It is very easy to for people to ignore the prospect of rights. But in case the government is pushing for stronger rights, as the government of India is doing, it needs to simultaneously work on both trademark and copyright protection for the GIs to have net benefit for the stakeholders, the rights holders. Thank you.